Hello. So I want to try some low effort content. And the type of content I personally enjoy consuming is having someone yap on my second screen while I work on art stuff. So I want to try that. And the thing I want to yap about today is retopology. And the reason I want to talk about retopology is after the workshop class thing I did, I'm really starting to think that learning about retopology is overrated as fuck. So let's look at how beginners learn about topology first and then start from there. Now, most people learning Blender start off with some kind of box modeling. And obviously, learning about topology is helpful when box modeling because it helps you sort of keep things simple and allows you to create shapes without the meshes blowing up and being impossible to sort of manipulate. So teaching simple things like having clean edge loops and not filling your mesh with a bunch of n-gons, I can recognize as a good step in order to keep that process simple. But things have changed compared to a decade ago. Other methods to create objects such as sculpting have become much more accessible. So you still probably want to use box modeling for hard surface, but when it comes to organic shapes such as eyes, heads, nose, and whatnot, then you probably want to just use sculpting instead. But unlike box modeling, you normally can't maintain good topology while sculpting. So when trying to rig or texture, it's normally taught that you need to retopologize the mesh first. But this is sort of where my issue lies, because do you really need to retopologize, or is this just a massive time sink? So since retopology is often taught as a necessary step, I'm going to argue today that it's really fucking not. So I'm going to go over some of the reasons why you'd want to do retopology, and then follow it up with how said reason isn't really enough to justify the time and effort required to complete this so-called necessary step. So number 1, avoiding poles. So if you don't know, poles are vertices with a bunch of edges connected to it. And the reason you want to avoid poles is because it can cause rendering issues. And this is one of the main reasons why you want your model to be made of quads, since a quad subdivides into 4 quads. But a random assortment of triangles will spawn into, more triangles, and the chances of poles spawning gets higher the more you subdivide the mesh. So if your mesh is made of quads, then during the rendering process, when the object gets subdivided a bunch of times in order to render displacement, you're most likely going to end up with a bunch of poles that are going to create some rendering artifacts. But the thing is, if you're not rendering with displacement, then how likely are you to run into this issue? Not fucking likely. So is it really worth the hours retopologizing when you could just, fucking not do that? So yeah, that's reason 1. Reason 2, optimization. So retopology is a form of optimization, where you're basically manually controlling how many faces the geometry gets. And obviously, the more optimized the mesh is, the better. But once again, there's a trade-off of time. You could spend an hour retopologizing that rock you just sculpted, or you could just decimate it and not waste an hour of your life on that shit. And yeah, maybe don't squeeze out every redundant face using this method, but honestly, how many use cases nowadays require this level of optimization? If you're trying to make a game for the Nintendo 64, then sure, I get it. But if you're just trying to create a one-off 3D environment render for a personal project, then why fucking bother? So yeah, that's reason 2. So let's move on to another reason. Deformation. Now, if you're deforming a mesh using a rig or a blend shape, then having bad topology is obviously going to create issues. If you plan to bend your shape, like at an elbow, then you probably need to make sure you have enough geometry there to sustain the shape. Or if you want the bend to sort of happen in a particular way, having edge flows that sort of contribute and complement that bend will make things easier as well. Another good example of how having good topology can make animating easier is looking at the game Guilty Gear. If you look at the face of a Guilty Gear character, you can see it has this weird sort of triangle circle that makes up the mouth. And the reason for this is that anime expressions are normally very extreme, so trying to make these shapes with more traditional topology would mean having to very awkwardly squish vertices together. And since the faces with the Guilty Gear characters don't have vertices in this area, you're not going to run into that issue. So yeah, overall, if you're going to be spending dozens of hours animating a character, then, spending a couple of hours to get the topology right isn't a bad idea, right? Or is it? Let's have a look at a different example, shall we? Let's say you simulated a 3D outfit for the art chat. So should you spend a couple of hours retopologizing the object? Or should you just decimate it and move on? In my opinion, you should just fucking decimate it and move on. Why? Well, VR chat takes raw motion capture data, right, and applies it to a rig in real time. And this basically limits what you can and can't do with the character rig. And this limitation basically results in unavoidable clipping, stretching, and twisting. So spending hours on topology isn't really going to change anything, and you're still going to get errors. You might get a few less errors, but when these errors are an accepted part of the medium, why spend hours trying to make it that 1% better when you could spend that time on literally any other part of the process? Now, that might be an overly specific example, but I'm just trying to stress the point that there are times where it's really just not worth it. I'm not trying to argue that retopology isn't justified in every circumstance. I'm just trying to make the point that shit takes a really long time, and unless you have a really good reason, don't fucking bother. And this attitude of people treating retopology as a necessary step isn't some kind of straw man I'm pulling out of my ass. I've gotten comments of people being surprised when I unwrap the raw scope. I've gotten other comments saying how retopologizing means the asset is useless when that's really not the case. Since, as I said, my VR chat uploads have some janky ass topology, but it still works. And I've also seen a lot of Reddit posts of people who are clearly new posting this scope and asking if the retopology is any good. And this always bothers me since it's focusing on something that, in my opinion, just isn't really important at this stage of the development. Like, I get that you're trying to learn part of the 3D pipeline, but if you want to scope, then focus on getting good at sculpting. If you want to learn lighting, download a scene to practice lighting with. If you want to learn materials or how to render people, download the Emily project and render that. Like, you only have so much time and effort, and wasting it on this technical grunt work it bothers me. But yeah, that's my rant. I may or may not have gotten some of the technical details wrong, but this is a lazy video and I didn't really do any fact checking, so my bad if I did. So if you have any thoughts you want to add, comment below. I definitely don't always have the most popular take, so there's probably someone out there who has a thing or two to say in response. Well, hopefully you enjoyed the video. And well, that's it for now. Till next time.